part of what we are doing for disabled children. I'm going to talk about our research, which is a teamwork done by BT Jeddah Center in Disabled Children Association. Our research about effect of hippotherapy on gross motor function measure and functional performance in children with cerebral palsy. Outlines of our study. Introduction. Cerebral palsy describes a group of permanent disorders of the development of movement and posture causing activity limitation. Structural and mechanical changes in body alignment as well as musculoskeletal changes can occur in cerebral palsy children. Often children with CP develop compensatory mechanism to overcome gravity and recruit new muscle groups to maintain stability. Visual, somatosensory, and vestibular systems behaves as a multisensory network that provides posture and balance. These systems, in combination with cerebellar and musculoskeletal systems, are controlled by the central nervous system and are affected by experience and environment. Therefore, therapies such as hippotherapy may minimize clinical aspect of the disease and improve postural balance. Previous studies have shown that hippotherapy can improve daily functional activities in patients with CP. Horseback riding really works the core muscle that stabilize the trunk, abdominal, back, and pelvic muscles of the children. Horseback riding considered a great way to exercise different parts of the body. Horseback riding as therapy was introduced in beginning in the United States, 1969. Since then, this therapy has shown over 600 accredited riding centers in the United States and many other countries. In DCA Jeddah, we started horseback riding in 2005 up to now. Hippotherapy refers to the use of horseback riding as a treatment for medical conditions. Hippotherapy through horse movement works by further developing physical and cognitive abilities. The main effect of hippotherapy, as I discussed previously, it will strengthen the core muscles of the child. It will provide balance and coordination, muscle tone and flexibility. It's a good cardiovascular exercises, mental exercises, and it will give body awareness to the children. Actually, hippotherapy provides a dynamic base of support for participants, making it an excellent method for improving trunk strength, balance, and control. And it will build overall postural strength and endurance, addressing weight shifting and improved motor planning, which is very important for children with CP. The three-dimensional reciprocal movement of a walking horse, which is the key in the treatment of hippotherapy, stimulate normal pelvic movements in participants that closely resemble the one during ambulation. The purpose of our study was to evaluate the effect of hippotherapy on gross motor function and functional performance in children with cerebral palsy. Material and method. The children with spastic CP were selected randomly, those who met the inclusion and exclusion criteria. We include those who age 5 to 12 years, those who weigh less than 40 kg, those with gross motor function classification system from level 2 to level 5, who understanding simple commands. We excluded those who previously participated in hippotherapy, the one with IQ less than 60, the children with hip subluxation more than 50%, and who underwent surgery in the last 12 months. Initially, the objectives and procedures of the study were explained, and each parent or guardian signed a consent form approved by Hippotherapy Group and DCA. The parents or guardian was requested to complete the pediatric evaluation of disability inventory. The mean age of the children participated was 8.5 years. In our study, we recruited 80 children, 40 children in the experimental group and 40 children in the control group. This table is showing the number of children according to the gender, neuromotor type, and each level of gross motor function classification system. Majority of our children was CP spastic diplegia. We had 26 in the control group and 27 in the experimental group. That's because it's the most common type of CP, as you know. The children of both groups had been attending BT and OT 1-hour session. Our primary outcome measure was gross motor function measure 66 with its 5 dimensions. Dimension A, lying and rolling. Dimension B, sitting. Dimension C, crawling and kneeling. Dimension D, standing. Dimension E, walking, running, and jumping. Our secondary outcome measure was PEDICAT with its 4 domains: self-care, mobility, social cognitive, and responsibility. The gross motor function measure and PEDICAT were selected as outcome measures because both are commonly used in children with CP and meet the criteria for reliability and validity with respect to responsiveness to change. When used together, the gross motor function measure and PEDICAT provide a comprehensive picture of a child's functional abilities at the ICF activities. Hippotherapy was administered 45-minute sessions once per week for 24 weeks in this study. Hippotherapy was performed at the Open Sky Riding Center, Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The sessions were conducted by a trained hippotherapist, 2 physiotherapists, a horse handler. Volunteers walked along either side of the horse to assist the child. Stretching exercises were done for 5 minutes. The therapist followed target objectives aimed to develop the child's sensory motor and perceptual motor skills. The child was seated astride the horse, wearing a helmet and orthoses, encouraged to perform various activities designed by the physiotherapist to emphasize movement in a forward and upward reaching direction. This movement will encourage the child to do active postural control, to strengthen his muscle, to balance himself, and the most important, which is trunk-pelvic dissociation. Results. After 24-week intervention, significant improvement in all dimensions of gross motor function measure, total score, and goal total score were achieved in both groups. In addition, changes were significantly greater in the experimental group than the control group. Though there was a significant difference in dimension A between control and experimental group, dimension A showed little improvement comparing to other dimensions. That's because majority of our children had achieved dimension A already. In dimension B, there is highly significant difference between control and experimental group. Dimension C also we have highly significant difference. Dimension C is the dimension measuring the transferal ability of the child or the transitional activity of the child. For example, what I mean by transferal ability, it's the ability of the child to move himself from place to another and the ability of the child to move himself from position to another. For example, from lying to sitting, from sitting to 4-point, and vice versa. How the horse can help the child to do these movements, first of all, is the mounting action when the child is riding the horse and the attempts of the child to balance himself while the horse is moving will strengthen his trunk, pelvis, and all anti-gravity muscles, and therefore will improve the transferal activity. Among all dimensions, dimension D, standing, was the most dimension improved. And that's because the lateral weight shifting movements that child experiencing while riding the horse helps in developing static and dynamic standing balance, which we are measuring in dimension D through standing independently for 20 seconds item and raising one leg item. There is also highly significant difference in dimension E between control and experimental group. Dimension A showed great improvement in experimental group. What causes that improvement is that the rhythmical pattern of the horse's gait that mimics the movement of the pelvis during human gait. Another reason is the warmth of the horse which will help the child to reduce the tightness of the muscles and to mobilize the pelvis. There is also highly significant improvement in goal total score and total score of gross motor function measure. Gross motor function measure percentage improvement in the experimental group, we had 92.5 children improved in gross motor function measure and 7.5 did not improve. In control group, we have 72% of the children improve and 28% did not improve. Why there is no improvement? Because some children had missed some sessions, and according to growth motor curve, most of the children had already plateaued. After the 24-week intervention, significant improvements in the total score and the subscore of all 4 domains were achieved in both groups. In addition, changes were significantly greater in the experimental group than the control group. Mobility and responsibility domain showed marked difference and most improvement between experimental and control groups among all dimensions. According to gross motor function classification system, we have in the experimental group 11 children who improved from level 2 to level 1, 10 children who improved from level 3 to level 2, 5 children improved from level 4 to level 3, and 2 children improved from level 5 to level 4. Discussion. The purpose of our study was to compare the efficacy of hippotherapy as a treatment option for children with a primary diagnosis of cerebral palsy to traditional physical therapy consisting of stretching and strengthening exercises. Why did we conduct this study? To prove that hippotherapy together with conventional therapy give better results than only conventional therapy. Importantly, hippotherapy addresses aspects of motor, visual, tactile, and vestibular systems. Cognitive, communication skills, peer interaction skills, and self-confidence can also improve with the aid of hippotherapy treatment. Not all therapy techniques can combine all these aspects into one treatment while maintaining the interest of the child. Gross motor function measure. The significantly greater gains in gross motor function measure 66 score in the hippotherapy group suggest the beneficial effects of hippotherapy on gross motor function. Of the previous studies showing significant gains in the gross motor function measure, 3 studies, Sterba et al. 2014, Magabon et al. 1998, Cohn et al. 2011, reported significant improvement only in dimension E. One study, Cassidy et al. 2004, reported significant gains in all dimensions except dimension A. Our study demonstrated significant improvements also in all 4 PD domains of daily activity, mobility, social, and responsibility in both groups, but greater improvement in experimental group. These findings suggest some positive effects of hippotherapy on the child's actual performance in daily life. Cassidy and Nicholas 2004 said, significant PD gains suggest that hippotherapy enhances the child motivation and willingness for participation in an activity. According to Shartliff et al. 2009, hippotherapy improved dynamic trunk stability and functional reach in children with spastic diplegia. Our limitation, there were no strict control of the intervention. Some of our children went to treatment outside the center. This study did not determine its cost effectiveness. Actually, hippotherapy incurs higher cost than conventional physiotherapy, like, for example, maintaining horses, an arena, and training volunteers. Hot weather climate, we were doing hippotherapy during good weather climate. Actually, in summer, we are stopped the treatment. Conclusion. The results of our study demonstrate the beneficial effects of hippotherapy on gross motor function and functional performance in children with CP compared to control group. The significant improvements in PEDI-CAT scores suggest that hypotherapy may be useful to maximize the functional performance of children with CP. Further researchers should focus on how the horse promotes postural control and balance, examination of the relationship between changes in postural stability and functional outcomes due to hypotherapy treatment, explain the enjoyment that the patient experienced from the horse, unify the timing of hypotherapy session, clarify if the effects of hypotherapy reach a plateau after a certain time period or if motor function continuously improved. At the end of the day, nothing is more exciting than for the rider to give a carrot to their horse and pat on their head as an act of appreciation. Me, on behalf of BT team and Jeddah Center, we would like to express a special thanks of gratitude to Dr. Hisham Al-Haidari for his support, to Dr. Maryam Jamil for helping us in a statistical analysis, Dr. Zuhair Maimani for his support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ghadir, for an excellent presentation. And now we have our second speaker, Dr. John Costello, who's the Director of Pediatric Augmenting Communication Program and the ALC Augmentative Communication Services in Postal Children's Hospital. His speech will be about augmentative communication and ALS, why refer early.
So, as you heard, I am a speech-language pathologist at Boston Children's Hospital, and we have an ALS augmentative communication program. My focus for today's brief conversation is to talk about trying to be as proactive as possible with augmentative communication for people who have ALS. As you may know, ALS is a motor neurodegenerative condition that affects people typically in adulthood, but certainly can be in teenage years as well. It presents itself in two different ways, both as many people have limb onset, so it starts in their fingers, their hands, their feet. For other people, there's bulbar onset, so it's specifically in their speech and their swallowing. What I wanted to highlight in this very brief session here is the fact that despite common wisdom in the field of augmentative communication and the field actually of even ALS, that one waits until there are specific challenges with someone's communication difficulties, in fact, what we should be doing is be far more proactive in our interventions. Our team, as you can see here, is made up of several people, both speech-language pathologists and occupational therapists. Because I have such a brief period of time here and I have incredible amounts of content that if you are interested in ALS, you should know about, I want you to know of our website where certainly the video that I'll show you today is there for you to go and look at, many, many other videos and downloadable templates and materials. So why is it that it's so important that we are being proactive with people who have ALS? ALS is a disease that is all about trying to preserve energy and being prepared in advance. There are some commonly and faulty perspectives in the field of ALS, namely suggesting that if someone is diagnosed with ALS, that one should wait until someone is beginning to have significant difficulty with speech. It's commonly said that people with ALS are not willing to address communication early in the disease process. And it's often stated that we need to wait until someone's intelligibility is particularly impacted before talking about backup communication strategies. We share with everybody and with all of our referring neurologists a specific definition. of communication, helping people not be so afraid of the term augmentative communication, which for many people with ALS, the way it's often presented, is scary. Instead, we try to highlight that we all use augmentative communication strategies currently, and that the goal of an assessment is to look at how to continue to use those strategies and ultimately maybe change the balance. To kind of refute some of the arguments that one needs to wait until, or the patients are unwilling to come in, I can tell you in 6 months of data, we can highlight here that people are coming for initial visits for an augmentative communication assessment quite early in the disease. This is in months. Similarly here, words per minute, where the literature states that one needs to wait until 120 words per less. We as typical speakers speak anywhere from 180 to 220 words per minute. And what you see here again is that people are coming in well within near normal range of speech production for an augmentative communication assessment. And then finally, in terms of looking at quick access tools, low-tech tools, we have many, many people who are very interested and willing to look at these quite early. So what I want to highlight, because there is such a limited opportunity with people who have ALS, if their speech starts to become impacted, to engage in some proactive strategies, I want to highlight, first of all, message banking. What is message banking? It's, first of all, something that we started at Boston Children's Hospital in our intensive care unit 27 years ago with children. And it started as a process of working with children who we knew were going to lose their ability to speak temporarily, post-operatively, and we began to have them bank messages, digitally record messages that were incorporated into technology post-operatively. At that time, we had no idea that it was going to be such a significant impact on patient care, not only from the perspective of satisfaction, but also from the perspective of the medical staff being able to engage more with the patient, and indeed the patient feeling comfortable and being able to functionally communicate and participate in their own care. Many years later, when we began to see people with ALS, we naturally incorporated that same model. Our voice is our acoustical fingerprint. When you speak, it is a reflection of who you are, and hearing one's voice is key. Therefore, message banking is digitally recording, storing words, phrases, sentences, and personally meaningful messages so that they can be used with one's actual intonation, prosody, after one loses the ability to speak. In the interest of time, I only have one of many videos that I want to show you, but it's one of my favorite because it also highlights how not only is our voice an important piece for people and our loved ones to hear, but indeed even for animals. So Holly was doing an operational test with technology. She's using eye tracking because she's completely lost her ability to use her hands and has lost her ability to speak. She had banked thousands of messages before she lost her ability to speak. We incorporated that into technology, and this video was taken because it was intended to be an operational test of whether or not everything was working. We were not paying attention to who was in the room, and specifically were not paying attention to the fact that the dog was in the room. Holly then went into the category where she had banked messages to her dog, and you can observe.
Walker, come here, Walker. Walker, come on. Walker, come here, Walker.
Isn't that great?
Walker, come on. You want a cookie?
And I think what's important about this video is that when we think about supporting someone to have their voice, we naturally think about communicating with loved ones, communicating messages that are critical and important to us. And what I have learned, and we've got many other videos of people talking with their pets, even cats, who I typically find cats to, under any circumstance, not socially engaged, but have had cats responding. This video, for those of you who are interested in seeing it again, I saw someone trying to videotape it. It's on our website, so you could go to the website and look at that as well as many others. The message banking process is one that can be rather time-consuming, and the efforts of then engaging all those tools into technology can be quite time-consuming. Because of that, we initiated, so that every center can do this proactively, we initiated a web-based service that is free of charge that allows one to upload messages, and after they're uploaded, it will run it through. We're currently using IBM Watson. We'll likely be changing that because we're wanting to incorporate it as many languages as possible, including Arabic. Once everything is uploaded, everything then is automatically labeled, and one can then store those in categories. And I'm going to rush through this video just so you can see steps, because I will keep to, I've got about 7 minutes left.
Whatever you decide, I trust your judgment on this.
So this gentleman has
I know this is for daughters.
recorded a message. It's been perfectly labeled by the system.
Roads, don't forget to change the oil
And
in your
then
cars.
we're able to mark that, save it to a category, have it saved in the cloud, so that when this gentleman is ready to use an augmentative communication system, all those messages are there. I should say as a side note that as people have looked at trying to duplicate our model of message banking, several companies have looked at it as a way of trying to engage people in using their products. I personally am vehemently opposed to people selecting a product and banking to it, only because in the field of augmentative communication, the best match is only determined when someone most needs it. And if a technology is purchased and selected before someone actually needs it, there's a very strong possibility that when someone finally does need it, it will be the wrong technology. One has to match the technology to who the person is at the time they have the need. Thus, this process of message banking is intended to be technology agnostic, so then it will serve anyone's needs down the line. Voice banking, as opposed to message banking, is the process of creating a synthetic voice that sounds like you. That can be done by a process of recording an inventory of specific messages. Typically, voice banking companies require about 1,600 messages because they're looking at the co-articulated sounds in a particular language. After one voice banks, and you can hear the voice that I created. So I had voice banked and then created a message in my own voice. I took a message that one of my patients with ALS had authentically banked for his wife, and I spoke it here.
You are the love of my life, and I am so glad you have been beside me.
So that sounds pretty staccato, but it does sound like me.
The love of my life.
But
And I am so glad that you've been beside me.
if I wanted to communicate that message, I absolutely would want to message bank that, not voice bank it. I would want my intonation, my heart to be part of that. There is now a move toward having an Arabic voice bank process. So a cappella has been doing some great work, and I worked very closely with them and was pleased to get the latest information. As I mentioned, when one is looking at doing voice banking, it requires taking a script of about 1,600 phrases and reading those. Because, and you know far more about this than I, obviously, but because written Arabic does not have many vowels in it, the concern was if they were given a written script that someone's production would vary based upon how one read the actual script. So they chose to take what is a well-established, known script, which our sentence is a script from the Quran, where, as I understand it, it is well rehearsed, well practiced, and presented and spoken in the same manner each time. So by having that control, the goal is to be able to create a synthetic voice in Arabic that will then be functional across multiple dialects. I want to very quickly, extremely quickly, talk about quick access low-tech tools as well, that one needs to always be introducing as early as possible to people with ALS the use of low-tech strategies. We begin very early on to introduce partner-assisted spelling. And what partner-assisted spelling is, and I can show you a quick demonstration here of a woman
I row,
where
the letter I, J, K, L, M, First letter's M, next letter A.
She is going through, I am holding this alphabet board.
I. O.
I'm just calling out row by
U.
row. She's giving me a signal when I
Is the
get to the correct
letter U.
row, and then we're
V.
able to very quickly spell.
W.
This
X.
template
Y.
is something that people have told
My.
us has
Is that
been
the
one of
whole
the
word?
most powerful strategies
Next word.
at a time
A.
when communication is
E.
difficult. The reason
I.
it's been so powerful is
Letter
that we
I.
encourage people
J.
very early on to
K.
learn to use it.
L.
And because it's also been so
M.
useful, and I'm going to forward
I.
this a bit, because it's also
Thank
been
you.
so useful.
My pleasure.
What we have done
Is there anything I
is
should
created
know?
a template that is
it
online where you can
itchy?
download all of the pages. This
Pain?
particular one,
Front of
of
the
course,
body?
one can modify the symbols based
Stop me when I
upon
get there.
need and culture. In this case, I then switched to, is there something you want to tell
Around
me?
your-
Is it
your
something to
neck
do with your
area.
body? She's now directed me to her neck. I still don't understand
now I just
fully
wanna know how
what
bad
the
the pain
issue is. So now I've gone to a pain
Stop
scale.
when I
It's
get
also
there.
part of this template that you can download.
Okay.
There's one for male, one for
Around here.
female.
Do you-
We introduce this strategy extremely early to people so that they don't have to learn it in the heat of the moment. So this woman who can walk and talk and speak, who has come to us actually from India, has come to Boston, is using this strategy, is learning to use this strategy, so if she ever has difficulty speaking, she will not have to master the strategy at the same time she urgently needs to communicate a message. And again, that is the key about the proactive intervention, making sure people as early as possible are doing this. Finally, one other template that we strongly encourage people to use proactively is one where people can fill in specific phrases that need to be communicated, and specifically this came about because I was working with a couple, a man and a woman, his wife who has ALS. He was quite upset that he had made his wife repeat a message multiple times only to realize it was something she said to him all the time in a specific context. He was really upset and very critical of himself. I had suggested he start to write those messages down. No person does that, no matter what. And so what I learned is if I give people a structure, if I give people a blank template that has tabs on it and say, I want you to start putting a topic on the tab, and every time a message comes in, write it in on this booklet, people do it. And when people do it, it tends to be a functional tool. And in my last minute, I will just tell you that I've worked with several people, and one person in particular, who, because she had developed this so early on, in her last 48 hours of life, where she was at home, heavily sedated, sitting in a chair, her eyes closed, unable to engage, with a mask on fully, and we were told, be with her. She's no longer going to be able to communicate, but she will feel your presence and appreciate it. Her nurse walked by her and said, I think I need to suction your mouth, took her mask off, or at first brought her chair up to a 90 degree. She was in a recliner, took her mask off, suctioned her mouth, put the mask back on, and went on her way. 5 minutes later, Holly had vocalized. We heard, Her sister said, are you trying to tell us something? Is it on your flip book, which Holly was intimately part of creating? Is it on the bed page? So, and they by now knew it by heart. Is it on the bed page? Is it on the positioning page? Is it the first column? Is it the second column? Is it move my head? Is it, and as she was about to say the next message, the nurse said, I forgot to recline her chair. And the next message indeed was recline my chair. And so that to me was one of the most powerful indications of proactive intervention, because here Holly, at a time in her life when she was supposedly not able to engage at all, was still directing her own care, participating in helping us support her comfort, and was intimately involved and engaged in communicating with those around her who loved her. And again, on our website, there are tutorials for this and a free downloadable template, and I think I need to stop there. And if there are any comments or questions afterwards, I'm glad to take them. And also, I've got templates here. If afterwards anyone wants to look at what some people have filled in, I'd be glad to show you those as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Costello, for a very excellent presentation. And yes, I think we have some questions to ask later on. Our next presenter is Dr. Saad bin Bindwazi, Associate Professor and Physical Therapy Consultant at the Department of Rehabilitation Science in King Saud University. His speech will be about the association between length of stay and functional outcome among patients with stroke discharged from an inpatient rehabilitation facility in Riyadh.
Thank you, Dr. Khulud. Good afternoon, everyone. My presentation today will be about a study that we conducted with our colleagues at King Fahd Medical City, and the paper just published a month ago in the Medical Science Monitor Journal. And it's a research project that we collaborated with our colleagues at King Fahd Medical City, and that research project supported by a fund from King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology. The goal of this paper was to examine the associations between the length of stay and functional outcome among patients after an intensive rehab program at King Fahd Medical City Rehab Hospital. I have divided my presentation into 4 sections. I will start by giving a brief introduction about the stroke issue and the stroke rehab, then the methods we used in this study, then I'm going to discuss the results and conclusion. We know that stroke is a major reason for mortality and disability. According to the CDC in the United States, one person is affected by a stroke every 40 seconds. And every 4 minutes, somebody died because of the stroke. So if those survived the stroke, they ended up with severe or some kind of minor disability. In both cases, those patients need to go through a rehab or intensive rehab program, especially in the post-acute stages. There is no agreement between the component of the rehab and which is the best and which settings. However, we know rehab very important for those patients to improve their functions. Stroke rehab will not cure the disease or the brain damage, but again, it will help them having a better quality of life and improve their functions. Stroke rehab can be provided in different healthcare settings, either in freestanding rehab hospitals like intensive or in inpatient rehab facilities, which is the most recommended, but at the same time it's not, it's an expensive kind of care compared to other stroke rehab facilities or care that's provided in skilled nursing facilities or in other settings. The definitions of multidisciplinary rehab, it's kind of a rehab that is provided by more than professions, physical therapy, OT, speech-language pathology, medical care, nursing, and so on. And in patients' rehab facilities, the program needs to be intensive for around 3 hours a day for 5 times a week. In defining length of stay, it's simply the hospitalizations period. So how many days the patients spent in the hospital. Literature shows that a typical post-stroke length of stay in IRF is different, or there is a variations between the length of stay between countries and even between the settings themselves. For example, in the United States, since 2007, the length of stay was reduced to reach up to 16.5 days due to some political reasons. In Australia, it was found to be around 28 days. In New Zealand, it's around 30 days. However, there is a limited data about length of stay in Saudi Arabia. So that's why our goal is to share our experience at King Fahd Medical City Rehab Hospital. And this study was conducted in this rehab hospital, which is one of the largest rehab hospitals in the region. It is accredited by CARF. And the study design for this study is a retrospective observational study. We reviewed all the medical records for patients admitted to the hospital from November 2008 till December 2014. We included only data for those who have a diagnosis of stroke, and we ended up with 409 patients. And according to their length of stay, we divided the patients into 4 groups. Those who spent less than 30 days, and we call them the shorter length of stay. The second group are those who spend around from 31 to 60 days, and we call them the intermediate length of stay group. 61 to 90 days is the third group. Lastly, which is going to be our reference group, those who spend more than 90 days. For the outcome measures of the study, we used FIM, or Functional Independence Measure. FIM is a well-known functional measures, which is developed in the States back in 80s at the University of Buffalo, New York, and it has 18 items, and it's about 2 domains, the motor and the function. For the motor, there are around 13 items, and for the cognitive, there are 5 items. The score ranged between 18 up to 160 for the total. Therapists will evaluate the task of the patients doing the following tasks and give them a score ranging from 1 to 7. 1 means fully dependent, 7 means fully independent. And the validity and reliability of FIM used for stroke patients well established. And to use FIM, you need to have a certificate from the center in Buffalo. For the statistical analysis, apart from the descriptive statistics, we used a linear regression analysis, and we treated FIM as an outcome and continuous, and we used the 3 categories of FIM, the motor, the cognitive, and the total. For the predictors, again, we used length of stay, and we controlled for, in Model 2, we controlled for the age and gender. For Model 3, we also controlled for the same socio-demographic variables, along with stroke type, body involvement, whether it's in the right or left side, and discharge dispositions. Does the patient discharge to his home or to somewhere else? So in this table, moving to the result section, showing the socio-demographic characteristics and other clinical characteristics. Firstly, we see that patient in the 4th column is the data for those in the 4th group. So we had like 24 patients, and those who spent around 90 days or more, and their average length of stay was 131 days. For the 3rd group, those who are spend a month to 3 months, their length of stay, average length of stay was 72 days, 71. For the 2nd and 1st group, as you can see, the average length of stay. In general, I would say there is a statistical significant differences between the 4th group. According to other variables, age, gender, there were no statistical significance between the 4 group. But we could notice that people in the short length of stay and intermediate have, or they are quite older than the people in the prolonged length of stay. And this figures showing the FIM score at discharge, and stratified by the length of stay. People on the right side of the figure are the FIM scores, the total FIM, the motor FIM, and the cognitive. And you can see when we compare it with the people in the short length of stay, there is a statistical differences between the 4th group and the 1st group for every single component of the FIM. Here is the findings for the association using the linear regression. In model 1, again, it's an adjusted model. We see that people in the shorter length of stay have 14 points better FIM score compared to those who are in longer or in the prolonged group. We noticed also statistical differences that people on the intermediate group who spent 31 days to 31 days to 60 days have an improved by 9 points. For the second model and third model, also we notice the same trends, that there is an improvement on FIM, total FIM score, and it's reached up to 18 in model 2 and in model 3. When we entered other variables, we noticed also aging and gender are statistically significant with the length of stay. For example, men in the model number 3, they, age, by increasing by 1 year, total FIM decreased by 0.5 in the total. Being women decreased their score by 0.9. So, and that's statistically significant in both models. Also, being discharged to somewhere else except home was associated with a decrease in FIM by 3.5 in the total FIM. So it's good to send patients to their home. Now moving to this table showing the associations between length of stay and the FIM motor subscale. In model 1, an adjusted model, people in the shorter stay have a better FIM score by 10 points compared to those on the prolonged stay, and 6 points for second group. But it wasn't statistically significant for all models. Again, we noticed the same kind of significant associations in other variables. This is findings for the cognitive. Same trends. So, this study has some limitations. We cannot generalize our findings to other hospitals. It's based on data from one single hospital, but it's a start. We couldn't able to control for other factors. We couldn't control for the effects of medications or their patients' comorbidities, if there is a family support. All of these factors found to be playing a role in improving patients' outcomes. Length of stay, again, it depends on the stroke severity and specific rehab needs. There is a myth that if patients spend longer time in hospitals will receive a better health care and rehab care, and that's not necessarily right, especially with the healthcare model here in Saudi Arabia. We know patients in King Fahd Medical City received free health care. Finally, I believe there is a need for clinical practice guidelines on national level about stroke rehab components and length, and emphasizing the importance of rehab team to work in a multidisciplinary environment. And also, we need more research to be conducted to and use standardized kind of outcome measures. We can't answer if there is a difference between private hospitals compared to public hospitals. So research is very important to be conducted. With that, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saad, for a very interesting study. Our next speaker is Dr. Afran Akram. He is a professor and the chair of epidemiology at Erzium University Medical Center in Rotterdam, Netherlands. And his presentation is going to be the link between cognitive and non-cognitive disabilities, two ends of the same spectrum.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here and to present some of my work that I've been working on now for, I guess, more than 12 years. I've been trained as a medical doctor, but it's been almost 7 years now that I saw my last patient, because ever since I'm dedicated to doing research. I do my research at the Department of Epidemiology. I also hold an adjunct position with the Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard University, and I'm really pleased to talk about a topic that really is very close to my heart, the link between cognitive and non-cognitive disabilities. I'm sure many of you are familiar with dementia, and that's basically the framework within which I conduct my research. I built up my talk in basically 3 segments. First is to just show you a bit about the burden of dementia. Second, some of the established risk factors and some established work, not only from my own lab, but also from other studies, especially also the Framingham study in Boston. And then some of the more recent work that we are doing right now, which really involves the non-cognitive part. Now, for dementia, I'm sure many of you are aware that the burden of dementia is increasing exponentially. These are just numbers you see from the World Health Organization, projecting the numbers of dementia starting in 2010 all the way to 2050, where you see this at least a doubling. If you look at the global burden of disease, dementia is now in the top 4 diseases and rising very quickly. The bottom left panel shows, and it will be better shown in this graph, that dementia is not a Western problem or a problem confined to a certain area. Basically, each region in the world, if you compare now to a situation in 2050, will have a huge increase. In fact, if at all, the increase in Western countries seems to be only 100 and 150%, whereas countries in the far east, for instance, have more than tripling in the numbers of dementia. Now, it's interesting that the Middle East region is not shown here separately. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Most prominently, that accurate numbers on incidents are lacking. But at the same time, we know that the biggest factor determining the number of dementia cases is age. So as a population will age, people moving beyond the age of 60, 65, the prevalence of dementia is bound to rise. So basically, these calculations can be done fairly easy. If you look, for instance, in Japan, where I think about 40% of the population is above the age of 60, you can easily see the burden of dementia there being huge. So it's something that, if it's not already there, it will be a big problem in the coming years. Now, the main feature of dementia, and this basically is the main slide of my presentation, it's fairly abstract, but it shows the message that there's this gradual decline in dementia. So it's not a disease of a sudden onset, for instance, myocardial infarction or stroke, even though for those diseases there's a process of subclinical atherosclerosis going on for many years before. But with dementia, also the clinical manifestation is very gradual. It's this issue of you start off in this green zone, and throughout certain years you end up in this red zone, and when a threshold is passed, that's when clinically someone talks about dementia. Now, the issue is, how far before does it start? And the answer is we don't know. Some people say it is at least 5 years before the clinical diagnosis that a disease is already present in your brain. Some people say that it might be even 20 years or 30 years. We don't know yet, and that's something that we are investigating in Rotterdam. It also shows you that if you want to study risk factors, causes of dementia, you probably don't want to study people that are already in the red zone. You want to start with people that are still in the green zone. But when people are in the green zone, you don't know whether someone will develop dementia or not, because if you knew that, you didn't need to do the research at the first place. So that means that if you want to do research on causes of dementia, you have to have these population-based cohort studies, basically that you study a whole population and then follow them in time to see who develops dementia. And that's also the cornerstone of my research back in the Netherlands. Now, the numbers of dementia, these are actually numbers from our own study. This is actually combining 3 diseases together, diseases that are very much interlinked. That's dementia, stroke, and Parkinson's. And the numbers might be quite small, but just to guide you through it. The blue line is for men, the red line is for women, and basically it shows you the lifetime risk. So basically it says that if someone at the start, which is at age 45, is free of these diseases, what is that person's risk of suffering a brain disease during his or her life? So someone who's free of disease at 45, at least 1 in 3 men and 1 in 2 women, so that's 50% of women, will ever suffer from either dementia, stroke, or Parkinson's. And that's a huge number, because if you look at public health policies revolved around, let's say, heart disease, it's like 1 in 3, 1 in 4 will suffer from heart disease, and you see huge funding going towards that effort. Or, for instance, breast cancer, women, it's like 1 in 9 will suffer breast cancer during a lifetime, and that is a big public health message. Somehow the 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 men and women respectively for brain diseases didn't catch the attention that it, I think, should catch. So that's one of the messages I'm actually advocating in all of my talks. If you make this distinction again, you really see that the difference between men and women, the light blue box at the top, that's the difference in dementia. So it seems that stroke and Parkinson's are more or less the same, but the difference between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 is being caused by dementia, and obviously there is huge overlap. So people that suffer and stroke and dementia, or dementia and Parkinson's, and there are a few unlucky ones that actually suffer dementia, stroke, and Parkinsonism. Now, our research is embedded in the Rotterdam study. In the left panel there, you see a map of the Netherlands, and the red dot is Rotterdam. It's not a very famous city, although I tend to believe it is a very famous city, but I can really imagine not many people could locate it on the map. On the right, you see the map of Rotterdam, and basically our university, that's the middle image, the Erasmus University Medical Center, is located really in the city center, but our research, the Rotterdam study, is actually being carried out in the center on the top right, which is located in a fairly well-described homogeneous neighborhood. So it's not in the city center, because for a population-based study, you want to be sure that people keep on coming to your research center every 3 or 4 years. So there is very little immigration and migration, and that people, once they enter the study, they remain in the study. So we selected a very homogeneous neighborhood in the outskirts of Rotterdam, where we invited everyone to participate. It used to be 55 years and over. Now we are inviting people 40 years and over. So that we have no inclusion-exclusion criteria. If you live in the neighborhood and you're 40 years and over, you will be invited to participate. And we have had response rates of close to 70-80%, which is really very high for population-based studies. Typically, you have 30, 35, you're happy with that. We have had 75 throughout the years. The study started in 1990, so it means that almost for 30 years now, we have been collecting data on these individuals. It's not unlike the Framingham study or the cardiovascular health study. Basically, I tend to say that the Rotterdam study is the Framingham of Europe, and most people will understand what we do. This is just a summary of the various measurements that we do measure. It ranges from cardiovascular, neurological, locomotor, gastrointestinal, dermatology, you name it. Basically, throughout the years, we have added more and more data to the study. I jokingly say that I cannot remember a certain measurement being dropped from the study. We have only added and added. In total, we have about 8 hours of in-person contact with each participant among a total of 15,000 individuals. And importantly, we also have genetic, epigenetic, other omics, imaging, and pharmacological assessments. So this is the setting of the Rotterdam study. If I now move on to dementia, basically, if you talk about risk factors for dementia, and that's something in the Rotterdam study we have been investigating, it's a huge plethora of risk factors, some protective factors, some controversial factors. But the reason I'm showing you this collage here is to say that there's not a single risk factor for dementia. So it's not like an infectious disease. For instance, if you have the tuberculosis bacteria, you get tuberculosis. This is a multifactorial disease in which each factor will have a small contribution, if at all having a contribution. Now the question then is, where does our current knowledge for dementia stand? If we know these risk factors, how much of the dementia could we prevent? You know, you see their blood pressure, you see their blood being measured for glucose. Suppose the whole population would be healthy. What is the current status of knowledge of dementia? And this is work we did a couple of years back. Basically, if you would split up the pie in known causes of dementia and their impact on its prevalence, and here I looked at a subtype of Alzheimer's, but the numbers aren't that different, you see that about half of the cases of dementia can be explained by known knowledge. Now, there are a couple of issues here. First of all, it's at the population level, so you cannot, at the patient, say whether your cause is known or not. At a population level, it means that for 50% we know what is causing the disease. By comparison, for stroke and heart disease, you're up to 70-75%. Second is that there's a huge part by genetic variants which have been identified, but we don't know how to intervene on those. Obviously, you cannot change your genetics, and it's just knowledge that we have that, hey, they are influencing that. It means that half of this we still don't know, so there's plenty of work to do. I mean, in 20, 30 years of dementia research, we only achieved this. And I think the most striking is that half of, let's say about a third, can be prevented by hypertension, diabetes, stroke, physical activity, nutrition. It becomes smaller and smaller. But what for me is surprising is this is not new knowledge. You know, we know that these things are bad for you, smoking is bad for you. We know this for 30 years, and even now it is a preventable cause of dementia. It is worrying why we fail to implement policies that we know are effective. Now, if we have these risk factors for dementia, the second question is what is happening in the brain before someone gets the diagnosis? Can we see in the brain what the pathological process is? Now, throughout the years in our study, but also many others, we have been looking at, on the one hand, the brain structure and function. Obviously, brain imaging is a cornerstone of that, but also think about cognitive testing. You know, just do repeat cognitive testing on memory, executive function, etc. You can get an impression of the brain function. So that's really studying the brain itself. And an important hallmark is also the brain circulation. Obviously, the vessels go to the brain. It's a very sensitive organ for hypoxia and ischemia. And we know that if you're talking about currently known modifiable risk factors, we have to look in the cardiovascular arena to identify those. Hypertension, obviously, but also something like arterial stiffness, cardiac function, etc., etc. Now, some of the work we have been doing in Rotterdam of late is basically arguing that the dementia disease is actually present in the whole brain. So if you look at people that have dementia, typically their whole brain will be full of brain damage. And why then the focus on cognition? Because obviously the brain influences all bodily functions, so if that brain damage is leading to some clinical manifestation, you should be able to detect that beyond cognition. And one of the things we've been looking at is motor function, gait patterns, because what we know is that for people with dementia to get institutionalized or lose their independence, it's not so much because they lose their cognition, it's because they lose their physical abilities. They become bedridden, they cannot really move safely without the risk of falling. And that's the reason for institutionalization. And the question then is, can you already detect motor function changes in this preclinical phase? Really a phase when possibly there's this window of opportunity for intervention. Now, we've been using this gait ride, which is a electronic walkway that people can walk over. It provides you an automated reading of walking and how the pattern looks like. And we've been working with this for a couple of years now. So when the first time I saw these data, it was actually for me surprising to see that something as simple as walking is actually a very complex thing. And let me show you in the next slide. And just to get you thinking, did you ever think that, you know, walking has 30, 40 different aspects to it? I didn't know. I thought, you know, you walk actually without even thinking. But basically what you can identify from walking is what we then call gait domains. We have used this term to make this similarity with cognitive domains. You know, with cognitive domains, everyone knows what you mean with that. You know, you have memory, you have executive function, you have speed, you have visual spatial ability, you have a lot of cognitive domains that you know are different from each other, but at the same time you know that they reflect cognition. So that's why we use gait domains, because these are domains that are different from each other, yet they represent gait. Now let me literally walk you through these gait domains. The easiest ones are up there, which we call pace and rhythm. It's basically a matter of how long your steps are and how fast or how slow you take those, so how much time it takes. And you can imagine that someone can have short steps, which are quick or slow, and long steps, which are quick and slow. So you already have 4 different gait patterns there. Then you have at the bottom, base of support. It's basically a metric of how far your feet are apart from each other. You can imagine people that have imbalances might have their feet further apart. And then there are 2 difficult ones. One is variability, one is phases. And what is important for me is that these 2 gait domains you cannot detect by the naked eye. Variability is basically the difference between your steps. I mean, you can have an average step length of 50 centimeters, but one step might be 49, then 52, 48. There's some variance in those steps. The average might be 50, but there's a variance around it. And the larger the variance, the larger the variability. And we know from literature that it is actually the variability that poses the highest risk of falling. So if you look at the risk of falling, it's actually something that you cannot see with the naked eye. And the same holds for phases. Phases is actually a metric that tells you how long both feet are touching the ground versus one foot being in the air. Now, people that are, let's say, imbalanced, they spend longer with both feet on the ground. And again, phases is a very strong predictor for adverse events. We also look at turning, and we also look at the tandem walk, which is more a coordination measurement. Now here you see graphs that just show you the pattern with age. I deliberately made it small just to show you the pattern. These are all those 7 gait domains. And what strikes me most, for men and women separate, and what struck me most is that there are a few gait domains that remain stable, such as at the left top, which is rhythm, which was the one that you could actually see with the naked eye. And there are a few that really go down very quickly, which are the second and the third one. And that's variability and phases. So it seems that just the aging process influences your gait, especially for those aspects that you cannot see with the naked eye. In the next step, what we did is to relate these gait domains to cognitive domains. And I'll just skip this slide to show you this one. Basically, what we did is to look at the various cognitive tests that we have. You see those here in Dutch, the Stroop test. On the right, you have the pegboard test, and left the 15-word learning test. And basically, what we saw is that there seems to be a very specific pattern of gait domains being associated with cognitive domains. And if you look at it more closely, it seems to be fairly logical. Remember that rhythm was the gait domain related to time, so how fast you take your steps. And that one seemed to be correlated with information processing speed, which is your thinking speed, which makes sense. Apparently, there's a speed center somewhere in the brain that is affecting both aspects. Similarly, the tandem walk, which was more of a coordination walk, is more correlated with the fine motor speed, with the pegboard test, where you really need to make sure that the pens are placed correctly. So again, there seems to be this correlation at a higher order in the brain that influences both your cognition and gait. Now, some work that you're doing now is to see whether these gait domains actually predict dementia. Now, what we did is, this is unpublished data, and we hope to submit this soon, is to look at a couple of thousand of individuals in which we have these gait measurements, and we followed those up for 7 years for onset of dementia. And what you see here is all those gait domains, and basically there are 3 that were statistically significant. At the very end is global gait, which is a general metric of gait itself. But then the 2 others, which is the second to last one and the second one, are variability and pace. So here again, this variability metric, something that you cannot see with the naked eye. So apparently there is brain damage occurring that impacts that variability, making variability a predictor for dementia later on. Now, what are some of the recent developments that we're doing now? We're looking at something like called initiation. The gait patterns I showed you so far were just a normal walk, turning, and tandem. And we argued that especially for something like Parkinson's, but why not also for Alzheimer's, these first few steps, the acceleration you make, would that be important? That's called initiation. We know from Parkinson's that this phenomenon called freezing, that people cannot initiate a walk. So what we do now is really look at the first 4 steps and see whether we can get a metric of initiation. And the second one is dual tasking. One of the criticisms we sometimes get is that you're looking at gait, which is influenced by your muscles, by your joints, by your vessels, peripheral nerves. How do you know it is reflecting your brain? So what we now introduced is a dual task. So we ask first people to just walk normally over the walkway. Then we ask them to do a difficult calculation. And we know that any difference, and we see huge differences, that those differences have to be caused by some brain function and cannot be because of the joints, because they remain the same and do not do the calculation. So wrapping up, I see I'm just over time also. Conclusions. First of all, dementia is a growing problem worldwide, so there's no region or country that is free of dementia. And it's more than a disease of only cognition, particularly gait, which itself is a complex phenomenon, and we divide that into domains, just as we have cognitive domains. And there's a strong correlation between the two. And finally, that decline in gait seems to be a predictor of dementia, independent from whether someone also has cognitive impairment. Finally, I also want to thank you for your attention. I want to point you also to the Erasmus Summer Program that we have every summer, which is a 3-week course on quantitative medicine, epidemiology, and biostats. We have faculty coming over from the whole world, so if people are interested to learn more about the program, I'm happy to provide some information. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Arfan. It's a very interesting talk. And now for our final speaker, Dr. Arij Al-Wabli, who's a principal investigator in the Center of Complex Engineering System at CAXT and MIT. She's a principal investigator in the Joint Center of Excellence for Earth and Space Science at CAXT and Caltech. Her speech will be about hybrid stroke rehabilitation technology, combining gesture-based interaction with brain-computer interference.
خلود. السلام عليكم everyone. الحضور الكرام بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. استأذنكم. I'll be switching to English to carry on the theme of presentations that we had in this session. In this brief presentation, I'll be sharing with you a concept paper. So the content of my presentation is very different from an experimental study or an epidemiology study, although we do that kind of work once we deploy technology. What I'd like to share with you in this presentation is a technology agnostic product that we designed for rehabilitation, and that's carrying on the theme that we have seen with the presentation of Professor Costello, and also in the context of stroke rehabilitation, carrying on the theme of what we have seen with Dr. Saad's presentation. Now, the technology that we developed, and it's being deployed actually April 10th, so it's very close to deployment, is a hybrid stroke rehabilitation system. It's a joint project across 3 institutions here in Saudi Arabia, so it's under the umbrella of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, and it's a multidisciplinary project in which we have researchers and scientists in Princess Noura University, King Fahd Medical City, King Saud University, and the hub of where we are working at, and that's King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, and that's the National Science Labs in Saudi Arabia. The project members, I would have to give them all the credit. They have been doing amazing work. I have Bushra Al-Qadi, who is with us in the conference today, and we have 6 developers within Princess Noura University's College of Computer Science. It's one of the largest computer science colleges with 5,000 students, all female. Not only in the kingdom, but it is by far the largest college of computer science in the MENA region. So the project, as I mentioned, has been conducted under the umbrella of a Human-Computer Interaction Lab. We're a multidisciplinary research center in which designers, developers, sociologists, cognitive psychologists usually work together to develop a piece of technology. But with these technologies, we usually design and develop them in collaboration, in co-creation, design design workshops with subject matter experts. So we build technologies for gaming, we build technologies for education, and more recently we have been engaged in building technologies for the context of rehabilitation. And in much of these projects, we come in as the engineers, as the technologists, and try to elicit the requirements of professionals in different domains and deliver the product that they would wish to have in their own hands in the context of the work that they do. Now, to touch on some of the statistics that Dr. Saad has actually presented in the context of stroke rehabilitation. As he mentioned, it is one of the leading causes of death across the world. The global statistics from the World Health Organization show that stroke, cerebrovascular disease in general, is the 4th leading cause of death. But the shocking and alarming statistic for us here in Saudi Arabia is that stroke is the leading cause of morbidity and disability within the kingdom. And that was part of the motivation that we had for this project. Now, 80% of strokes are preventable, as we have seen with some of the risk factors highlighted by Professor Irfan, is that they are preventable. However, much of the risk factors still are prevalent within our society because of lifestyle choices and others. So acute stroke treatment is effective. There are known treatments. There are stroke centers, especially in the main cities within the kingdom. They are less available in rural areas. However, acute stroke treatment is available. It's highly effective. However, what happens after stroke in our local context of Saudi Arabia is a bit challenging in that the care post-stroke care is fragmented. So we do have the preventive and then the acute, but when we come to the rehabilitation, we find that the demand exceeds the services that are available for the population at a national scale. Much of the work that we do is on a national scale. Then regional, right now we're aligning it with the Ministry of Health's new model of care that was rolled out March of 2017, in that we're dealing with clusters rather than institutions. And one of the first clusters to be experimented with and being monitored by the Ministry of Health is actually King Fahd Medical City. So we're also aligning the needs of stroke rehabilitation with the type of services that are being shaped right now with the transition from public health care to privatized, privatized health care in Saudi Arabia. With that in mind, it motivated us to look at how technology can help, especially with the new model of care, the introduction of telecare and other opportunities in which technology can alleviate some of the burden from these centers and alleviate the cost. We wanted to see where the opportunity here, and we found that there is an opportunity to contribute as designers, engineers, and developers. So when we look at the 2 phases that we have with rehabilitation, as we have seen the previous presentations, the inpatient rehabilitation, we have the physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, and then we have the vocational and psychiatry support that's provided for patients within the hospitals. But once they're discharged, the case is quite different. Many of the patients come from all over the regions within the kingdom to the hubs that we have in the Western, Central and Eastern region, and that would entail a high cost and inconvenience for them, and sometimes missed opportunities for them to pursue the rehabilitation program regularly, and the follow-up would not be as effective. So what we wanted to see is, can technology, a solution that is portable, low cost, extend the rehabilitation process beyond the clinical setting? And can we design it in a bespoke way that is open source, affordable for the population, while at the same time technology agnostic, which is the direction in which many of the technology solutions are being proposed at the moment. And this is where we brought together the talent in 3 institutions to tackle this problem. Now, part of the work that we do in the HCI lab mainly is eye tracking. We have 5 projects showcased in this conference. 3 posters show eye tracking, skin sensing, and brain tracking. So what we've found is that within the past 7 years, we have developed fairly sensitive and very highly accurate, robust algorithms for detecting emotional state of mind and levels of stress and anxiety from a simple headset that we hacked from the gaming industry. So it's the headset, a brain-computer waves that can read the waves and simply adapt to games and activities or apps on a mobile phone. So what we did is we used the software development kits of these technologies and started using them for mainly cognitive disability. So much of our work was with autism and ADHD and people that have difficulty to communicate. But the question, the guiding question for this project was, once we have emotion detection classification very robust, can we use that piece of code to plug it into the context of rehabilitation? With that in mind, it sparked the interest of developing these stroke rehabilitation systems with the students. When they had field visits to local rehabilitation centers, they looked at what is being done with occupational therapists and physical therapists. They wanted to augment it with also a live, real-time feeding of the brainwaves of the patient while they're conducting the training sessions. So much of the work that we have is based on this model for brain-computer interaction, and the credit here goes to our recently awarded a PhD, Dr. Abir Nafjan from Imam University, in which she looked at how we can augment speech and language therapy sessions, especially with stuttering that is linked to emotion, with real-time feed of the emotional state of the child or the adult during the stuttering session. But other technologies, as you can see here from the diagram, we also do it for gaming, for control, and for controlling the environment, switching on the lights. And we also have, in tomorrow's presentation, brain-computer interfaces for moving wheelchairs, motorized wheelchairs. So it can be applied to so many domains, but the way we deal with them is one of two categories that is globally known, and that's using brain-computer interfaces for either passive or active. Passive means similar to speech and language therapy. We simply just have a real-time feed of the brain waves, and you can feed the information to the specialist or the gamer or whatever context you're using and understand the emotional state of mind, emotional state or the cognitive state of mind of the user. Active means that you're reading the signals but using it to direct some kind of action, moving a wheelchair, switching on lights, opening a door, whatever action. An example of the headsets is the Inobio. The Inobio that you see here on the screen is a medium grade. So there's low grade that range in cost between $200 to $600. Inobio is around 10,000 euros. So it's a bit more expensive, but still it's wireless. It's not the wired EEG headsets that are often used in clinical settings. So it gives the user the freedom to move around while they have these headsets. Now comes the gesture-based interaction. Since this is physical therapy and the context is stroke, we wanted to embed some of the exercises that are typically given to patients so that they can take the device home. It could be a PC, it could be a laptop, it could be an iPad where they would settle it in whatever environment they have. It could be in their living room on the side of the sofa while they're doing these exercises. So basically, it provides them with an incentive, motivations, highly engaging. But what is more important is the tracking record. It keeps a log of what they do, how long they do it, what is their progress in each and every exercise. And the beauty of it in our co-creation approach that we have with these therapists is that we try to customize it and identify all the possible, let's say, collection of exercises that a patient can do. And once they're discharged, they're basically given a prescription of what they need to do, and they can be monitored. And when they do come back from whatever rural area in the kingdom back to a hub or a medical center, they do have a quantitative record of 6 months or even longer of all the exercises that they continued. So this is the before last presentation. I'm trying to keep it brief. It's a demo, so I'll talk over the demo. As you can see, you might hear beeps and some activities, but this is the first look of, or first showcasing, or first demo of our system. As I mentioned, it'll be rolled out in April 10, so this is the first time it has been showcased outside the lab. Much of our technology is open source, so we rarely patent these technologies because we post them on GitHub or open source communities so that the community can help us take it to the next level and improve these technologies. And for the past 8 years, our technologies have been in rehabilitation centers, have reached the homes of people, have reached the hands of real users, and we continue the cycle of developing it further. So what you see here is the concept of its rewinding, but we have the gesture-based interaction coupled with the BCI. And also we we often use triangulation in which skin sensors are also embedded, but you don't see them here. Skin sensors means a bracelet similar to a Fitbit that you might have, so it just measures skin conductivity, and when a person is anxious, the skin conductivity is higher depending on the temperature of the room and so on. So with that very rich data set of the user in every second of the rehabilitation session, you can get a fairly accurate measure of how well they're doing and the level of performance, also how they're feeling during the activity. And what the students are trying here is giving them, once you zoom into the area, let's say it's running on an iPad and it can pick up where the hands, with leap motion, it can detect the 2 fingers. And we're trying it with different technologies. So once it detects the fingers, it can model the full hand. And then the user would start playing the game in whatever instructions they would be given. So they would try to grasp and lift, and they can have different exercises for the shoulder, for the elbow, for the arm, and then for the level of grasp. Also the activities, they could be holding an object and still trying to grasp or, let's say, try to build something. So these are under development, but what you see here is one of the proof of concept activities that were designed. So the concept here is that the first prototype in alpha versions being rolled out, and the plan would be to engage with the community in forums and scientific conferences such as this one, in which we invite centers who are interested to collaborate and use it free of charge with our guidance, and we can set it up, install it, and in the hopes that we would get feedback to continue and develop. With this project, it has only launched in October of 2017. And having this time frame in which it was deployed was fairly short when compared to other projects. So the team was very excited, very motivated, and we hit our target very early on. And we're hoping that with the summer projects, we do have several centers interested, that we would be able to add more exercises and see if we can create a collection of services for rehabilitation that are bespoke and designed for our patients. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I thank again the team and the sponsors. We do have King Abdulaziz City, Princess Noura University, King Saud University, all engaged, and the wonderful team of researchers, scientists, students, developers, and the wonderful set of volunteers that have been working with us in identifying the requirements, helping us refine the design. We've had many bugs. A lot of the troubleshooting sessions were very interesting to see how the feedback of therapists and medical or clinicians, medical teams or clinicians can help us identify where we assume when we design technology that people are like us. And when we design technology for domains that are very far from what we know, we understand how to align the technology with the needs of our customers, our clients, and our users. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arij. And if Ms. Ghadir can join us here in the podium for some questions, if anybody have any questions. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
So I have a question. It was really nice to hear everybody's input and a lot of research involved in improving, rehab services, and it was really inspiring. My question is for Dr. Costello. You gave us an example of using the simple text for a form of communication. I'm sorry, it's the end of the day. Do you use high-tech AEC kind of in the acute settings at the hospital, or is it mostly low-tech?
In the intensive care unit and acute care, we use a variety. I think right now we have 2 clinicians who only do bedside augmentative communication intervention in the intensive care, acute care at Boston Children's Hospital. I think right now we have 4 eye tracking systems that are used, as well as a variety of other technologies for different access, and then also low-tech tools. So it's really a myriad of tools based upon the patient's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? I have a question for Ms. Ghadir about the study that you did. I mean, you live in Jeddah and you were talking about the limitations of the climate, which I don't think it's a very small limitation. Have this been ever thought about as an indoor activity? Because I don't think in Jeddah you have any, a very limited window of time where the weather allows it. So how that affects your study, or if you think about indoor?
Actually, we are doing it in Skywriting Center, and they are doing it outdoors.
So,
we never thought about it like how to do it indoors. Maybe there are no varieties of centers, or even not varieties. Even this Open Sky Center is the main center helping us to do this hypotherapy. We don't have much centers in Jeddah doing that. For now, unfortunately, we had a problem. They had some problem, actually. We stopped this hypotherapy just for now. Thanks God we done our study. But that's why we are searching for another center. It's very limited there, this hypotherapy.
Another question for Dr. Arij. I was looking at the device that the little boy was wearing on his head. For you to collect the data when in your collection data phase, and I'm just imagining my 3-year-old wearing something like this. Would it be wearing the device by itself a variable that might affect or a factor that might affect whatever information you're collecting? Have you ever considered it as a factor?
It is, yes, it is a factor, and it's always an issue, and we always take that into account, and we keep track of how many participants actually withdraw once they are asked to wear the headset. The Inobio that I actually showed was more user-friendly than other harder devices that are designed for the gaming community, for Xbox and PlayStation. The Inobio is a soft headset. You might have noticed it's felt material, and these sensors are clipped on it, so it's still drier electrode. It doesn't have the messy gel or the liquid. Despite that, some of them are hesitant. Sometimes the child is okay, but the parent is hesitant, and we do respect that. The Inobio actually has child-friendly that look like caps or Mickey Mouse ears. They do have different styles. They come in pink, they come in blue, but that doesn't always change much of their attitude towards a device that will be wrapped around their head. They're a bit hesitant. Now, the let's say attrition rate, the average number, because we've kept track of that. We've even published a study about trials and tribulations of BCI with children, is 20 to 30%. When we move on to older children or participants, teenagers or adults, it's usually 1 to 2%. We rarely lose participants because of the concern. They're becoming very common, and they actually look very much like a headset that you would wear for listening to audio. So the adults and teenagers are more comfortable than children.
Thank you so much for that. And if we don't have any questions, we end this session with a huge thank you for our speakers who really enlighten us this day. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time and coming all the way to give us this beautiful presentation. Thank you so much.